Morning and welcome. So today we're talking about the physiology as it relates to anxiety and transformation. They follow a similar pattern. And what I'll do is to show you how why they follow a similar pattern is because it's physiology. Without going too deep down a rabbit hole, if you consider that everything is atoms. So I think it helps to start with that frame. If you don't think of everything as atoms, that would be the Newtonian physics world. If you think of everything as atoms, that would be the quantum mechanics or quantum physics world. And I think it evolves because if you just do first principles thinking, you come to that conclusion. I also think that the reason why the ancient martial arts and the philosophers in the New Thought era, they had it right. They got it right because they were looking at nature to figure out how humans operate internally. They looked at plant life, they looked at water, and they looked at animals, and through that, they could gain a sense of what was going on with humans. But I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to go down that path. But you can just start extrapolating. If this is true, and this is true, then what else has to be true? I invite people to come on because I want to talk to folks about their experience, whether they agree, whether they disagree. The way I look at it is if you disagree with me, then I disagree with me until we figure out who's missing information. By going with this principles approach, I went from top down. And what it highlights is that all of this information is known. There's nothing that I'm going to talk about that you can't Google and find. But what happens is it lives in silos. It lives in silos not because the scientists, to get peer reviewed, they go deeper, not wider. If you go wider, then the experiment or the research takes on other things that are not researched. And you have to research that. You have to do your trials on that, your experiments, your rounds, et cetera, on that one. And so it's easier to go deeper because you're using what's already been proven, what's already peer reviewed, and you just go deeper. And I think that's why we end up with this seemingly obscure terminology. Neuroscience is a very young field. If you consider the brain is a couple of 100,000 years old, and regardless of what you look at, you can see 10,000 years for the human, you can see 100,000 years for the human. So whatever it is, even some places say a million years, whatever it is, 10,000 is safe. 10,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers. And as hunter-gatherers, you can see how the evolution supported that hunter-gathering. And it's one of the reasons I say we have challenges today is because we're structured like hunter-gatherers. And we're living in a world with technology. And consider that we didn't have anything like what we have today 500 years ago. So this is all very recent. And in neuroscience, the brain scanning tools to tell what was really going on wasn't available until 3 decades ago, 4 decades. Well, obviously it evolved, but neuroscience became big for the layman in the 90s. And then the brain scanning tools just got better and better along with technology. So that's where we are today. But as a result of it being so new, such a new discipline, if you will, there's always these new terms. And I was looking at emotional intelligence. I like the self-determination theory. And what I'll be doing in the leadership series is mapping those together to show dynamic leadership. So what we're doing now is the self, personal leadership and agency. Then we go leadership one-to-one. And I look at it as one-to-one because leading does happen on a one-to-one basis. Yes, you're leading a group, but true leadership at the front line is one-to-one. At the executive level, then it's one-to-many, and that's where you're setting culture. But when you're setting performance, it's one-to-one, collective and one-to-one. You go back and forth. For the executive, they're mostly one-to-many, and it's about culture. But the nice thing is it's very fractal. So what we talk about in the self, it applies in the one-to-one as you're operating with others. Now, if you've been leading, we accept, well, you can't change other people. That's 100% true, but people can change themselves. That's the whole point about the self. Once you learn how to change yourself, it makes it easier to help other people change themselves. So we'll get into that next time when I'm talking about physiology, touch on it today, but it goes throughout the 7-step reset. The 7-step reset is my model for transformation, for personal transformation, and it works well as self-coaching. And then for leaders, what we'll do is focus on step 7, 1, and 2, because that's the state, that's the presence. And then steps 3 through 6 is stimulus and action, which is happening all the time. And by the time you're in it, it's too late. You want to be setting, if you're a leader, you want to be setting the tone and the culture before that. And that's how it comes into play. So you can go and look at the last video on physiology. 95% of everything we do is done by habit. Habits live in a network of neurons. That being the case, you can see that it makes sense to focus on physiology. I spend a lot of time on physiology. I go so far as to say cognitive processing is physiological, it's not mental. When people think about cognitive processing, they're thinking about thinking, and thinking is very different than association. So I look at the network of neurons, the 100 billion neurons, each connected to 1,000 to 10,000 other neurons. That is the network of neurons, and that's where the habits lie. And you can look up individually words like myelin, synapses, synaptogenesis, deep practice, neural pathways, and what you'll see is that all of that lines up with what you would read about the subconscious. That's why I said the philosophers had it right. They called it a subconscious mind. I won't call it a mind. I sometimes call it a subconscious because it has to map to what people are talking about. And I've asked the neuroscientists, why do we keep calling it a subconscious mind when we know it's a network of neurons? And it's just one of those things where it's way too big, right? We've been calling it a subconscious mind for centuries. All the textbooks say subconscious mind, et cetera. If you write a book and want to get published by a major publisher, you're going to have to call it a subconscious mind because that's what's proven. If they go look for research that says it's a network of neurons, they'll have to do multiple layers to find it. And that's not how you're going to get a book published. I'm saying that that's when you start looking at epigenetics and gene expression and Heart Math Institute does some great work. The book is called Heart Math Solution, which lays that out. And it makes the link between people getting sick, not following their heart or going against their heart. So it gets big. So what we're going to do is jump in here. I talk about the 7-step reset as my solution for the 7 performance areas. The 7 performance areas is what I lay out with clients in the 90-day transformation. And we do laps around the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. The reason we're doing this is we have to get the self in place. These are in our control. So mental is in our control 100%. Now, people may disagree a little bit with emotional, but once you get enough laps here, you'll see this is in your control too. And I'll cover that. This is actually step 5 in my 7-step series. So I'll cover that by the week after next. We'll be into step 5. And you do have control over the emotional, but it's not the way you would think. But once we get this under control, at least at a level that's acceptable. Once we get this, and then you find new weaknesses, you get a chance to push on that emotional muscle. Then once we get set here, then we do the right side, relationship, professional, financial. What we do is in our control. And then that enables us to interact with others. And everything else we do is with others, within relationship, with professional, with financial, involves other people, which means we've got to be able to not get emotionally hijacked. We need to be able to show up as the best version of ourselves day in and day out, regardless of what's going on. We've got to have agency amidst the chaos. Another way to look at the physiology, you can look up how many decisions does a person make a day, and you'll probably see something like 33,000 decisions are made per day. And that's 95% of everything we do is done by habit. So these decisions are just stimulus response cycles for the most part. And those stimulus response cycles happen over and over and over. And the reason I have this like this, so you have the pre-stimulus, that's steps 1 and 2. Step 3 is the conditioned reaction. And then steps 4 through 7 is your response. And it's the pause to respond, and then the check-in, and then the emotional modulation, then the action. And then 7 is mindfulness, getting back to mindfulness so we're present and we're ready for that next pre-stimulus. This is why I said, as a leader, once this is happening, you're in it. You're not going to have much ability to lead that into a different way. You're going to be more like reacting, just fixing. And we want to get to the point where we know that we've got that mindfulness state tuned in with the individuals as well as the organization. So if this is happening 33,000 times a day, that's about every other second, because we're awake roughly 65,000 seconds a day. You're going to have to get back here quickly. And I talk about like mindset. It's not about maintaining a mindset. It's also about getting back to a mindset quickly, and then preventing yourself from falling off, because you can have a growth mindset in a particular area and you get a shock into the system, and that shock causes you to get a fixed mindset. And I'll tell you that it starts, I'm going to share today how it starts with physiology, that have the 7-step reset. So I already covered this. There's your step 4. So that we condition, and by the way, everything that happens around this step 3, so there's a little bit of pre-step, because the system is always looking, it's always anticipating and it's already prepped. It's almost like if you're driving up to an intersection, you may let off the gas a little bit if you're unfamiliar with the area, right? You're just prepared, and maybe you even move your foot over the things. If there's like a lot of action going on, pedestrian cars, you might cover the brake. You're preparing. That's sort of what the system is doing with life as we're moving through it, seeing stuff, because remember this, the network of neurons processes 11 million bits per second. So it's seeing stuff out there, and then it prepares us. So there's a pre-step, and that's priming. Priming happens before the stimulus even shows up. This is why it's so powerful. So even though cognitive biases may be stronger than priming, it's more sequential because of the processing speed. So the priming gets us thinking a certain way. This is why con men can do what they do. This is why advertisers can do what they do in terms of getting us to do things that we were never even thinking about doing, because they're priming us. And then when information comes in, it's coming in through that primed filter instead of a neutral filter. And so one of the things we do here is to make sure you can be aware of when you're being primed, and more importantly, prime yourself. And then you have the step. So we're here now. Steps 1 and 2, as you can see, physiology is last. So we've already covered beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset. I did covered part of physiology last week, and now I'm going broader with it to make the case. And then we'll cover it again next week when we get into step 2, because when I talk about state, yes, we have the mental state, the physical state, the spiritual state, the emotional state, and the self-image. But if I was going to work on just one thing, I would take physiology from step 1 and use that for my getting back to where I want to be in step 2. Because this here is what you're being primed into. The calmer I can be, the more focused I can be on my agenda in here, my vision, the better I'll be primed over here. So we set this up, and I would argue that when you do this right, you're not you're not making 33,000 decisions a day because they're getting ruled out. They're just not getting seen. It's almost like if you're playing a video game and there's certain characters that you just ignore and you just focus on what you're doing. That's the internal priming. So my internal focus is stronger than the external, which is why I don't see the 33,000. We're hit with 5,000 and 10,000 ad stimuli per day, headlines. We don't see them, you can't remember them, but they've gone through your network of neurons. It's been processed, filtered out because it wasn't important to you, but those few headlines that do align with your goals or your fears, those get through. And this is how marketers start to get your attention. Next thing you know, you're buying something, and then you never use it because you've gone down that rabbit hole with the marketer. In this model, this is step 1, right? We're wrapping up step 1, beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, and then physiology. And any one of these can impact the others. I would say that if you look at which one more, it's probably physiology, and that's why I put it in the middle, and that's why I'm covering it today. But this model here, if you just remember this, this is sort of your development. You're taking care of your personal development so that you are always in a good place in this step 1. So step 1 is not necessarily happening 33,000 times a day. Step 1 is your present system. Step 2 is the micro view of that current system. So you could think about it like a graph, like a stock graph. It's going up and down, but there's a theme, right? There's a moving average, if you will. So you can think of step 1 as like a moving average of where you are, and step 2 is, are you below the line or above the line? And what you want to do is make sure you're above the line at crucial moments. You may have some ebb and flow, but step 2 is all about checking in, seeing where I am, and then using the tools that I'm talking about to get yourself back to where you want to be or should be for the next thing that's going to come. You don't know what that is. Sometimes you know it's going to be something, like if you're in a sales situation, you know what you have to be on, right? You know what this person's nature is because you've done some research, and so you just have to be prepared for that. Or if you're going to speak before a group, you're going to be on. You need to make sure you're at a good place. I used to do like actors do, and before speaking to a large group, I would isolate myself. I would not be involved. I would not talk to people. I wanted to be totally on my agenda, in my vision. What's nice about the 7th step is that now I understand, now that I've worked through all of this, I can get right back there quickly, and that's the power of it. So as an executive, as a CEO, you could go from getting bad news to talking to an important client to dealing with a employee situation or an organizational situation to dealing with investors. This can all happen in one day. So being able to get back to where you want to be, and most CEOs have learned to do that, which is why they're in that position. But what I'm telling you, I don't care who you are or what you do, you can have that same skill set. You just have to be willing to do a little bit of work, but we're talking months, not years. So now the network of neurons, they respond the same. So I put this on there because we get into this conversation about the parts of the brain and yeah, that's happening in this section. Like you go down the emotional intelligence, that happens in this part of the brain, and this happens in that part. I think the reason that that comes up is because there is some sequence to it, and there is some handoff. You don't have to understand. It's almost like, do you really need to know how the intake manifold, the combustion chamber inside the cylinder, the shape of the piston, the number of valves, and then the exhaust manifold, how those come together to optimize an engine for either top end, mid range, or torque? You don't need to know that. You just step on the gas and go. And that's the level I want to be here. We don't need to know what's happening in the amygdala and why the basal ganglia is handing it off, and then what's going on in the prefrontal cortex. And then you don't need to know that. You can validate it by looking at my content and then validating it with that. But this is about driving the car, and you don't need to know anything about how an engine is built to drive a car. In fact, if you've driven an electric car, you can tell that most of the time you don't even notice a difference between driving an electric car versus a combustion car, because they've got constant variable transmissions and combustion vehicles, et cetera. And it's the same experience. And that's how this is. The nervous system memory is not muscle memories. And one of the nice things about this is that I would say most people I talk to have heard of muscle memory. Many people have used the term muscle memory. Point I like to make is that it's not muscle memory, it's nervous system memory. Nervous system memory, it's the network of neurons, it's the associations. So the conscious mind does thinking. The conscious mind can decide, I want to do X before I do B, because we know that this and this and this is going to happen later. The network of neurons can't do that. The network of neurons lives in the past. It lives on what's already been connected. Neurons that wire together fire together, but neurons that fire together also wire together. So it's all about past associations, 100 billion neurons and trillions of connections. And those connections are the associations. And the reason it seems superior in thinking is because it processes so fast, 11 million bits per second. So you can see why the conscious mind is outgunned, and that generalizes to the conscious mind thinking that the subconscious is superior. But the word tells you sub is below. And then practice equals more myelin, more synapses, and then tuned transmitters. So if you think pathway and a person making a free throw, there's thousands of millions of neural connections in making that free throw. And the more finely tuned those neurons are, and that's done with myelin, as they wrap with myelin, they get more accurate and stronger, then the free throw percentage goes up. The percentage of free throws goes up. And that's how you get these players being able to hit the shot from so far out. So faster, more precise signaling equals stronger habits. And this is what works against us, because from 0 to 7, our myelination bar was very low. So you just show up and you're getting myelinated neurons, which is why we have those habits. The synaptogenesis or synapses was abundant. We had more neurotransmitter than we needed, which is, kids are always running. They're always in a great mood because those neurotransmitters include serotonin, which is a mood enhancer, and dopamine, which is an amplifier. It's not just a habit formation, it's also an amplifier of the signal. And that is how conditioning is done. And so when we look at the 7-step reset, we're essentially doing the same thing that was done from 0 to 7, but we're doing it based on your vision instead of based on how the model was working, which was it just takes in your environment. And you can just screenshot this, but I just did this to talk about how these different areas, the basal ganglia, amygdala, hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, et cetera, their main function and what it does in daily life. I've put this together so that you can see what they do and to meet that standard of yes, but. Because if you've done any study here, you know that these books talk about the amygdala does this, and I think they've done that to get away from the subconscious. But I think they've taken us down into a more complex hole, because now I talk to people who are trying to think about remembering all of this and where it comes in and how they're going to act. You don't have to. We're going to use self-determination theory for the leaders. Always be engaging where's this person from an autonomy, competence, and relatedness standpoint, and which one do I need to adjust? Which one do I need to impact with my next action? Or how's my next action going to impact autonomy? How does this decision impact relatedness? How does this decision impact their feeling of competence? And we also talk about how you position feedback, whether it's good or bad, so that we're tapping into the dopamine, so that we're telling the network of neurons what's good or the appropriate way to do it. And we're telling the network of neurons the ways to avoid, and the networks learn. The network of neurons learn the same way it did from 0 to 7 to get along in the tribe, where we are signaling to the network of neurons how they get along in the organization, and that's how the executive can set culture. So culture can be set, it can be changed, and it can be set. Now here we have the anxiety and transformation similarities. I've mentioned this several times. That's why I'm calling it the crusher. And what I decided to do was take my transformation model and apply it to anxiety. And in doing so, you'll also gain the benefits of transformation, because it's not really that different. One is coming from below the line back up to comfort zone. One is breaking out of the comfort zone and going up. So while the barriers are different, what we have to do to get through those barriers is very similar. So one thing, this is one, stopping the anxiety spiral that's going down. You need to first stop it and then reverse it. But if you stop it early enough while you're still in your comfort zone, you don't even have that issue. The reverse happens automatically just by stopping it, right? I draw the diagram. We have the upper limit, we have the lower limit, we have the comfort zone. We're moving along in the comfort zone. And then we have this area here. This zone is the caution zone before we fall down. And then up here, it should be an excitement zone, right? But what happens is that excitement and anxiety have a very similar, and so we have this excitement, but what happens is excitement has the same signature as anxiety, which makes sense because it's energy. And if everything is atoms, and atoms are mostly, an atom is 99.99999% energy, and only 0.000001 matter. And it makes sense then that if atoms are connected to atoms, the cells are made up of atoms, you can see why excitement and anxiety could have a similar signature. So what I was saying is, as we're going through here and we get into this caution zone and we feel that signal, it tells us, oh, we spiral. By stopping the spiral, you never get down here. When you get down here, right, and you're spiraling down, that's when we need to do a little bit more work to come back up here. And this action is very similar to this action, because when you break through here, you have a barrier. And this barrier causes us to maybe have some cognitive dissonance. We could end up sitting there for a long time. Stories, habits, past successes, models of the world, culture, friends, all this stuff comes into play here, and it keeps people stuck. And then once you break out, you have a new problem. So down here, you lived by habit. 95% was by habit. Up here, especially if you're on this trajectory doesn't respond the same way, because your habits down here were for steady state. And you've built them over time, and they've been working. It's almost like you fit yourself into the 0 to 7 conditioning that you've had. Now what we have is this new problem up here where you're still moving, is like up and down, right? And it could be volatile. What we want to do is reduce that volatility. And we're going to reduce that volatility by following principles. And by following principles, instead of using habits, we have principles and near principles, and that keeps us immune to the VUCA. So we don't have to worry about the VUCA. We're not chasing every opportunity or running away from every threat, because we're following principles. And this is why it's so important to be able to modulate the emotions. I do this drawing because it's a visual of breaking out, and you can see where people are. Their language tells me where they are. And when they're up here, I can tell that they're pulling old conditioning up here. And that's why after the 90 days, as I was saying, both require catching the physiological spike or decrease early, having one or two simple levers that you can trust. And that's what we do when we do laps around the mental, physical, spiritual. We're finding consistent ways that they can deal with, and then that expands it. So this is contrary to what I'm seeing happen with emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence has gotten so deep, so broad, and now they're creating like intelligence has been broken out, and now you have these other intelligences being broken out, but you can't remember that. So to know or not do is to not know. 95% of everything we do is done by habit. Yet we're spending most of our time on the 5% of the conscious mind trying to learn more. And we're already not using most of what we know. So this is like a losing game. Rather than go down those paths of learning more and learning more and learning more, you're going to have one or two levers that you can trust. And after you can trust that, you can add another lever, and it's taking into consideration what you would be learning if you go the other route. But I think of it like a football team. If you watch a football player go from high school to college to the pros, they don't keep learning all this new language. Running is running and cutting is cutting and patterns are patterns. They may add a new pattern here or there, but they're not adding all this new terminology. Focusing on the fundamentals and getting better, making the fundamentals efficient. At the high school level, how they do their footwork is not nearly as important as the footwork at the pros, because the footwork at the pros makes them, you have to be able to pivot back the other way, etc. You can't get sloppy with that because the level of competition is so high. And in business, we don't have that level of competition. We don't have somebody face guarding us. We don't have somebody trying to stop our every play. And we can get away with, oh, but I think this way is better, and I think that way is better, and oh, we should do it this way. And there's a new thing now. Let's do that new thing. Let's focus on the fundamentals over and over and over. And rather than use who's most persuasive, we're using principles. That's the idea of that other slide. This is a big one, feeling the intensity without quitting. So when I was talking about going live in different settings and putting myself out there in different settings, and it's not big, right? We're not facing Serengeti tigers. It's just discomfort. Sure, sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes the Wi-Fi doesn't work. Sometimes the camera's glitching. I've done lives outside, and that's really intense because there's so many different variables. Not only do you have people, but you have heat. My cameras would fail from the heat, and then your Wi-Fi interrupts. There's so many different things can happen, and you want to get used to, okay, I feel the intensity, but I just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and that's that normal state. You just don't go into spirals anymore. You just don't need to use you don't need to use emotional modulation because you're just flowing through. All right, so these are slides for you to just take a screenshot of. I'm not going to talk about every single thing, but physiology is the major driver, and I'll spend some time on this in step 2. This is why in step 2, when you do your check-in, it makes sense to look at physiology. And when they say 55% of communication is physiological, while I agree with that, I also take exception to it, because in sales, and that same language says that words are 7%. When I'm in a sales situation, I'm listening to every word. I'm looking at those words as 90% because I'm asking questions, and I'm beyond the network of neurons. I'm asking questions that are taking the person into the conscious mind. So we're out of the network of neurons. I'm finding what's really important to them. I'm finding what their fears are through their answers. I don't have to ask them their fears. I just have to ask them what stopped them in the past. And they're going to lay that out for me. And as I build trust with the communication, I'm now talking to their heart and mind. I'm not talking to the network of neurons. So once you're in the heart and mind, I'm saying the words are 90%. In the network of neurons, yeah, physiology is, and that's why we're talking about it. So all of these you can remember, and as leaders, we've got to be able to pay attention to facial patterns. We have to have our own routines to make sure that we're in a good state for whatever's coming that day. And then I look at physiology as the hardware. So this is, I try to connect it back to like technology, computers, and it does to a degree. But if you look at the physiology as the hardware, and the software would be the associations. So the network of neurons, the neurons are there. That's the hardware. What's going through the neurons is energy, and 99% of an atom is energy. So it's all energy going through there, and thought is energy. This is why it's so easy to confuse. This is thought at its most base level is energy. What goes through the network of neurons is energy. And so you can see why people think that those associations are thinking. They're not thinking. And because it processes so fast and the subconscious has a reaction time, AKA network of neurons, has a reaction time of a quarter of a second, you can see the habits fire way before your thoughts do. And then because they fire, they're already feeding you what you should be thinking. This is why you have to have that pause conditioned in. And I discount the network of neurons because, especially if I'm above the line, when I'm above the line, which is where we should be pursuing our purpose in this model, and you're now living by principles, I have to discount what's coming in from the network of neurons. Yes, it's information. I want to weigh it and see how does it apply, but I'm reserving the right consciously. That's why I say don't let your response be your reaction, especially when you're pursuing a quest. Anxiety fires before your logic arrives. There you go, right? So you're physiologically responding or reacting, and that reaction becomes the response because you don't do that step. And next thing you know, you're off into some land. And this is why you can see it really clearly when people are being triggered. Physiology interprets the world faster than the conscious mind. And if you want a different life, you have to program the hardware differently. And that's the 7-step reset. We're reprogramming the hardware. Now, habits are in the body, not the mind. I said that muscle memory is nervous system memory. So this all raises that. You can see that shown out here. Again, you can take a screenshot of that. And again, I mean, if you look at the martial arts from hundreds and thousands of years ago, and you look at combat, what goes on in special forces, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, it all follows this model. And it was formed before we had the brain scanning tools, but they formed it because it's what worked. It's the deep research that found the best of the best sports. And this is, martial arts, you're competing against other people. And at those highest levels of competition, only the best solutions work. And this is where people have formed it. But now that we have the brain scanning tools, you can actually go backwards. You can do a top-down view and see what's actually working. And this is how I cut across the silos. And you could do the same research yourself and come up with your own point of view around it. Here's some examples of making the case that your cognitive processing is actually physiological. But look at this blood sugar. This blood sugar can shift your mood. People don't think about it because they blame it on other things. They look for other reasons. They're in a bad mood. They look for why am I in this mood? But if you look at your diet and nutrition and you understand how long things take to take effect, and you go back and you look at your hydration and you can see what's going on. Hydration is huge because you need nutrients in your brain. Your brain needs nutrients and oxygen, and it gets this nutrients and oxygen from blood. And if you're dehydrated, the blood is thicker, which means it flows slower, more slowly. And that means your brain is getting starved. And when your brain is getting starved for either oxygen or nutrients, it goes into stress mode, fight or flight. You start getting cortisol, and now you're primed for threats and you're less effective. Everyone knows that when you are primed for threat, when you're perceiving a threat and you're anxious, you can't deal with new information coming in, and that's a problem. People know that posture sets tone. Coaches are big on this. They'll get their players standing up and moving. They don't want their players slouching and having their head hung down. It's going to put them into a defeated state before they're even playing. Breathing patterns. This is an interesting one, right? Shallow breaths create anxiety, but anxiety creates shallow breaths. So you can, again, take a screenshot and just work those out, and you'll see that physiological activity is the same as what you get with cognitive processing. And here, habit change takes time, but look, you can this is why you can control it. You can program your posture, your breathing. You can do all of this. You can program all of these things. You can do this. So I don't think it's hard. I really don't. I've looked at the rituals. I've tried the hours-long meditation, which I don't have anything bad to say about them other than it takes time. And I wanted to look for things that were accessible to executives and business people who don't tend to go down that path of long, arduous meditating and all those things. So I have something that's simple that you can apply. I do recommend having some kind of a set in the morning because you're priming yourself in the morning. You want to prime yourself to be calm. You want to prime yourself on your priorities for the day. You want to prime yourself for your internal vision and keep your internal vision bigger than the external. And I take 10 minutes of deep breathing every day. I do 15 seconds inhale and 15 seconds exhale. I started at 5. quickly moved to 10 using a form of deep practice. And then I worked my way up to 15. I may go to 20, but I'm fine with 15. There's benefits of box breathing, 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts exhale, 4 counts hold. There's benefits of that, setting the vagal tone and getting yourself more in the parasympathetic system, being front and center as opposed to fight or flight. So we don't want to be in fight or flight. We want to be in this nice mindful state. So 4 box breathing, 4, 4, 4, 4 is good for that. And so going to 20 seconds inhale, 20 seconds exhale introduces more stress to the system. It's a different purpose. But what I use it for is anchors. So during the day, if something shows up that I wasn't expecting or that I don't like, I just take a breath. Even while you're in it, when somebody's coming at you, you just take that long breath. That's why I do 15 seconds. I can take a 15-second long breath while they're talking. And essentially what they're talking about is just, I'm hearing it, but it's not going into my network of neurons. It's staying at the surface level. It's just passing through and being processed for what it is, just a person ranting and raving, if that's what the case is. So here's the big slide. You have the other 4, beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, and mindset. You have these other 4. This is how physiology affects those directly. Physiology shifts can equal belief shifts. So if your physiology changes, it's almost like a different set of your beliefs come front and center. How many thousands of beliefs do we have? And sometimes they are counter to one another, but your physiology can put a belief front and center or make one take a back seat. And then you have tension patterns. We've seen this. The tension shows up before the conversation. If you're paying attention, this is where we'll focus on with leaders. You have to trust that thin slicing. Malcolm Gladwell talks about it in his book.
Right.
Now, the tension doesn't tell you what it is, but it tells you to slow down and ask questions to find out. That is so important. I see too many leaders, when they see that tension come up, they go harder. They lean in more. That's what they've learned. If a person is submissive, they may back down, but they back down in the mind, not their heart. And you're better off pulling it out of them and then coming back. Because typically you agree with them. It's not something that's completely counter. It's just time frames. You might be thinking 3 years, they're thinking 3 months, so you disagree. But once you get synced up on time, once you get synced up on the model of what the map is in the territory, then you're back on track. Then you have anchors. I use anchors a lot. So that breathing, when I'm doing 15-second inhale, 15-second exhale, that's an anchor. That anchors me to that morning ritual every morning for 10 minutes. And I will tell you my view, and I don't know if this is scientific or not, but I believe that let's say when I was doing 45-minute meditations, because I started with 1 minute, then I worked up to 15. Those 1 minutes are good because you can do it multiple times during the day. And that's essentially what I do now. 1 minute moments. If you do 4 box breath cycles, that's a minute roughly. And there's your 1 minute moment. But let's say I was doing the 45-minute meditations. What I noticed is that feeling would last for, let's call it 30 minutes after the meditation. But over time, it started lasting for a few hours after the meditation. Over time, it lasted for the whole day. But you can get knocked off, and that's why I have the 7-step reset, because I always want to get back on track. Even with the 10-minute ritual in the morning, that cycle lasts for days. I don't have to do it every day to be centered all the time. But by doing it every day, I just get more and more and more centered, and my vision stays the same. So I'm always focusing on the same thing. It's not changing. I'm not responding or reacting to the external world. This is why my internal world is bigger than the external world, which is why I don't make the 33,000 stimulus response cycles a day. I don't even see them. They don't show up. And my priming ignores the external world to a large degree. Then we have the neuroplasticity. So learning mode, this is important. Neuroplasticity is where you create new habits, but you have to be calm. You can't get neuroplasticity in stress. So a simple thing, if you're working with the team, you want to have small goals first. Get the momentum going. Small, easy baby steps. This is why fighters fight easy fights first. They have to build up the nerves. If you're always in fight or flight, you don't build neuroplasticity because you're in fight or flight and your cells are in protective mode. And when they're in protective mode, they can't do the growing. And then you also need rest. You need the blood flow. I kind of talked about that. Putting a demand on yourself. That's the example of me going live in different environments, even outside. And then priming. This is a starting point. So I'm preloading in the morning, preloading my cues so I can get back there very quickly. And during that time, I'm focusing on the 15-second breath, inhale, exhale. And I'm also focusing on my vision. What do I need to do? And I'm also asking my questions, not what's not right yet. And that helps me with my daily plannings. I do all that before I do anything. That happens. I'm hydrating and I'm breathing. So my brain is getting plenty of oxygen and hydration. And I'm priming myself. And then when I do my planning, it's coming from inside out, not outside in. And let's see. I'd said the other day that you have, blood. We can live seconds without blood, minutes without oxygen, days without water, and weeks without food. And that kind of tells you the importance. So we want to take care of the blood. Oxygen cleans the blood. Hydration thins the blood so it gets to the brain. And hydration also flushes out toxins. And if you add exercise in there, you're now moving the lymphatic fluid around. So the lymphatic fluid, because it doesn't have a pump, it helps you clean the blood. The more you clean the blood, the less oxidative waste you have. The less oxidative waste, the fewer toxins. And that's a nice cycle to be in. And then mindset, engagement, you open or you close. And it's not always, get into the body language. It could be signals, but none of this stuff is 100% because everybody's different. But there are cues that give you clues as to what's going on. And it's not so much that it's telling you this means that. So I would never say somebody with their arms closed is closed-minded. I would say that somebody with their arms closed, it's worth me checking in to see where they are and how they're doing. I want to find out if there's any areas that they're disagreeing with. And hopefully what I want to do is just find out that they're, in sales, I don't think of myself as selling them something. I think of myself as helping them overcome their own internal challenges, their own internal barriers, right? Because then I'm helping them. Then we're shoulder to shoulder. So my visuals, we're shoulder to shoulder, helping them do the thing that they told me was important for them. And here's the conditioned reaction. So I'll spend some time here when we get into step 2. The first 250 milliseconds, that's a quarter of a second. And this can amplify everything. And then there's another, I don't know if it's 250 milliseconds or what, that happens before. So the stimulus happens here. Before that, you have this pre-priming area, as I was saying, because it's always anticipating what's coming. You go through a door, it's anticipating a different set of potential stimulus. You go get in your car, it's predict a different set of external stimulus. And when you're depleted versus centered, if you're depleted, you're more likely to go fight or flight. When you're centered, you're more likely to have reserves of energy. So we want to do everything possible to be centered in this model. And that's why we talk about you are in control of it. Now, what do you do if you're depleted? Well, we can do some things with physiology. And I love the Garmin Venue 3 watch because while I don't pay too much attention to the body battery, I do pay a lot of attention to the HRV. And HRV correlates with willpower. The higher your HRV, the more willpower you have for the day. And willpower wanes with time and it wanes with decision making. So that's just a good thing. And this priming can amplify threats, but it can also amplify your strength. It can also de-emphasize. And that's why I say I discount my subconscious, so my network of neurons inputs, I discount it because it's from a different time. It was conditioned there from 0 to 7, and it worked well in a steady state. But when I'm above the line doing things I've never done before, no one else has never done before, I can't be relying on old habits. I need to be looking at what do principles say I should be doing. And then we have back to the physiology as hardware. So this is the slide that I started with this last part with, and it's just a repeat. So again, you can take a screenshot and then just do this work on your own and come up with your own model of the world. But I would say start small, start with things. A lot of people go right to the biggest, gnarliest thing, and they're stressed out all the time. If you are working with somebody who has a phobia and you just mention the object of their fear, they go into this state. You can't have a conversation with the person about their phobia without triggering the phobia. So there's other things that you do. So don't go after the biggest, gnarliest thing. And when I get into the emotional modulation exercise, and in fact, we'll do it in the positivity. So the positivity is a way that you can do that for yourself. And once you do it for yourself to see, oh, that's how I take myself out of getting fight or flight, you'll learn how to keep others from going into fight or flight. You'll find yourself probably giving more context because that context primes people. It's interesting. I noticed that I learned this concept of sensory acuity 30 years ago. And in building high performing teams, one of the things that I discovered is that when I provided context, I, I more often got the result I wanted. But I also noticed that providing context stresses some people out because they're trying to react to every single piece of context. You're putting out context and they're like triggered on the context. It's kind of interesting. So you'll learn to manage that. But these are the conversations we have in the year-long follow-up after the transformation program. So that is it. Talk to you soon. Take care.